Following the tremendous success of Godzilla the previous year, Toho Studios wanted to quickly follow up with a sequel. Due to Ishiro Honda being unavailable while working on another film, Toho turned to reliable horror director Morioshi Oda to bring Godzilla back to the screen for the second time. And so, Godzilla was resurrected the next year in Godzilla Raids Again.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, June.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham, and I am here along with Chris, and we are on our second episode and entry of the Godzilla franchise. Today we are doing Godzilla Raids Again, which I actually had seen the Japanese version of this film before I had seen the original Japanese 1954 Godzilla. So I knew what I was getting myself into with a rewatch of this, and I do enjoy this film. I'll throw it on here and there just to watch. It is not as good as the original film. It's not taken as seriously by a long shot, but it's a sequel that was rushed in for a cash grab. You know, the original Godzilla was enormous and such a big hit that this one, the immediate rush into production kind of gives it, it's like a subtle, how do I say this? Help me out here, Chris. What do I want to say here?
Yeah, so the original was November 3rd of 54, and this was April 24th of 55. So it's definitely a bit of a rush job, I think, even by those standards when movies were made on shorter timelines. I don't like to say, saying something like a cash grab or a rush job, but it honestly kind of was. The first film was a hit, and they wanted another one very quickly, so quickly that they didn't wait for Ishiro Honda to finish with the other movie he was making at the time. Like, that's how quickly they wanted it. So they had a kind of journeyman, company man director take the reins, and he delivers kind of a standard issue, kind of phoned in traditional monster movie with a lot less flair.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I like it. I know you like and appreciate this film very much, and I mean, it's not a bad film, but when you compare it to the original 54, I mean, that blows this film out of the water. But as a Godzilla fan, you still like and appreciate what we got here.
Yeah, it's not the all-time classic of the original, and it's not sort of the iconic kind of fun versus movie that King Kong versus Godzilla is. It's sort of this weird unintentional halfway point between them. The things I like about it is that it's still humans fighting Godzilla generally with just conventional weaponry, normal tanks and planes and jets and things like that, trying to come up with a solution without a super weapon or a giant robot or something like that. So I enjoy that it's still kind of like relatively speaking, a kind of grounded movie, even though there's more than one monster in it. It's kind of a traditional, military versus Godzilla movie outside of Anguirus.
Yeah, it's it's a man against beast, and I always seem to like those movies. I mean, sci-fi, the Sci-Fi Channel has created plenty of, mutant, animal movies where it's man against beast, and but I always go back to these couple Godzilla movies that we have in the franchise that are truly the military in Japan against Godzilla, and that those are the ones that seem to be taken more seriously and have a little bit darker tone. Even this one, it shows death and whatnot. So I mean, it's still taken a little seriously, but again, nowhere close to the original.
Yeah, this one's much more of the kind of typical run-of-the-mill monster movie that I think the original kind of gets written off as by people who aren't fans, like, oh, it's just some monster movie. Well, this one kind of sort of is just some 50s monster movie.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of background on the second film in the franchise. So Godzilla Raids Again, or another name for it in Japan was Godzilla's Counterattack, is a 1955 Japanese film directed by Motoyoshi Oda with special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya. It was produced and distributed by Toho, and again, it is the second film in the Godzilla franchise. This film stars Hiroshi Kazumi, Setsuko Wakayama, Minoru Chakai, and Takashi Shimura, with Hiro Nakajima as Godzilla and Katsumi Tezuka as Anguirus. Godzilla Raids Again was released theatrically in Japan on April 24th, 1955, and a heavily re-edited English-dubbed version was released theatrically in the United States on May 21st, 1959 by Warner Bros. Under the title Gigantus the Fire Monster. And this is the first of many sequels to the original Godzilla. The film was generally poorly received by fans and critics who criticized it as a rushed sequel, kind of what Chris and I were saying. But it is, however, notable for being the first Godzilla film to introduce the formula of Godzilla battling other monsters, which would become a longtime staple of the franchise. So there's a little history or background on Godzilla Raids Again.
Yeah, and I think a big contributor in the US, in North America at least, to a lot of people kind of just overlooking this movie is that even though it came out in Japan in 55, it wasn't out in the US until 59, and as you said, it was Americanized as a movie called Gigantus the Fire Monster. It's the one Godzilla movie that when it was re-edited and released in America, it was transformed into not a Godzilla movie. They didn't call this Godzilla Raids Again. It was called Gigantus the Fire Monster. That's what the title was. That's what the commercials were for. It was marketed as a completely unique and new monster movie as opposed to Godzilla 2. So, and that's how it existed in the US until I think the 80s. And in the 80s for the video release, all they did was call it Godzilla Raids Again and give it this sort of cheap animated Godzilla Raids Again title card on the movie, but the American release, the VHS itself, was still this Gigantus the Fire Monster cut where, they renamed Godzilla and they did all these other really bizarre changes to it. So and that VHS was out of print for a long time until the film finally was released on DVD with both versions of the movie. So like I just think this one wasn't played on TV and a big hit or on like Mystery Science Theater or things like that. So it just kind of got completely overlooked and lost in the shuffle when I think had that not been the case, maybe it would be a bit not necessarily more highly regarded, but a bit more well known and less looked over.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. If you're advertising this as like in Japan, Godzilla Raids Again or Godzilla's Counterattack instead of this Gigantus the Fire Monster, the people who've seen the edited Godzilla King of the Monsters might have flocked to the theater to see this, and it might have become a huge thing in the United States for people who liked that originally or the original edit from the 54 film.
Yeah, nowadays you would never take the sequel to a hit and turn it into not a sequel. Nowadays you're looking for the brand to capitalize on. I mean, heck, considering that King of the Monsters came out in America in 56, that's a year after this second film came out in Japan. It's almost shocking that when they went after the original, they didn't say like, oh, hey, there's another one. We'll grab that one too, and we'll release both of them in America, and we'll put Raymond Burr in both of them. It's almost weird that it didn't shake out that way, that they didn't jump on that opportunity. But it's just one of those oddities of history. It's like the American cut of this movie is it's certainly the American version that I would least recommend of all of the different Godzilla US edits, and it's just this bizarre piece of history and pop culture because of how it was Americanized.
Yeah, do you Do you remember how long the American edit of this is? I know the Japanese version is roughly like an hour and 20 or so, roughly around there.
Yeah,
I believe Gigantus is what, like an hour and 12 minutes or like 72 minutes or so.
I think it's 78 or 79, something like that. The net
Okay.
the net shortage from the Japanese cut to the US cut, I think, is less than 5 minutes. But what they do, though, because they hack they don't film any new scenes with any American actors or anything like that, but they cut out a bunch of material and throw in a lot of stock footage from old B movies and things like that, like primordial ooze and stock footage of like prehistoric dinosaurs, and newsreel footage of crowds and country scenery and all these kinds of things, and they cut in a bunch of that into these montages in the movie, and they have a ton of voiceover. They add a ton of voiceover narration. It's almost like an audio book when you're watching the American version of the movie, and it's not substantially different in terms of, they filmed a bunch of new scenes, but it has to be like the least faithful or the most bizarre transformation of one of these original cuts into an American version. It's odd.
Yeah, I've only seen the American version, I believe, maybe twice at the most, and I haven't watched it since the Criterion Collection came out with the Godzilla Raids Again, the Japanese film. And I know they were available on YouTube as well to watch for free, and like Tubi and whatnot. So that, I believe YouTube or Tubi was the way I seen the Japanese cut of Godzilla Raids Again for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a classic media DVD that had both cuts on it, and I had that DVD for a while. But once the Criterion set dropped, I did sell those old DVDs. I didn't hold on to them, and I just got the Criterion set. The Criterion set only has the Japanese version, and this was one of the American versions that the fact that like it wasn't really a Godzilla movie always irked the heck out of me. So this was always one that I kind of went with the sub anyway and just stuck with the original Japanese edit of the movie. So I haven't seen the American cut in years.
Yeah, that's why I had to honestly ask you the runtime of it, because I wasn't sure how much shorter it was, but I knew the cuts were almost like two different films. Like certain parts of them look like they're completely different films, which in regard they are.
Yeah,
but
it's a little bizarre,
Yeah, it's not like the 56 King of the Monsters where they try to keep at least a really good portion of it faithful to the original Japanese cut.
Yeah, like the plot's faithful, like the same stuff still happens mechanically in the plot, but all throughout you just have the Sukioka character just, and then we were standing there and listening to the radio. Like it's just, he just goes on and on, like I was flying and then my engine went out and then I landed my plane. Just like, again, it's almost like an audiobook. It's like, geez Louise, it's a wild, I guess they thought that narration would liven up the energy and the pace of the movie. I don't know.
Yeah, it almost watching it, I definitely prefer the Japanese cut, and I prefer the Japanese cut in a lot of these films just because they're the original cut of the film. But I mean, the subtitles don't bother me, reading them. But I mean, I along with you, I do appreciate most of the dubs as well.
Yeah, there's a few where I would say the dubs are like a fun, sort of equal alternative, because some of the dubs offer some nice unique things that the original cuts don't have. But generally I'm more of the original Japanese cut kind of a guy. There's maybe one example where I like flat out prefer the American edit of a movie to the Japanese original, and that would be Godzilla 2000.
And I 100% agree with you on that one. I will go ahead and get into a trailer for Godzilla Raids Again, and then get into a plot synopsis of the film, and we will come back with some numbers, some fun facts, and continue on from there.
Sounds good.
爆実験がゴジラを呼び覚まし、今度はまたアンキロサウルスの眠りを覚ましたんです。
Working for the Kaio Fishing Inc., a pilot named Shoichi Tsukioka guides a fishing trawler towards a school of bonito. Koji Kobayashi, another pilot, faces engine troubles and makes an emergency landing on Iwado Island. Tsukioka is sent to rescue Kobayashi, but they both encounter two giant dinosaur-like creatures locked in battle, Godzilla and a new quadruped monster. The pilots escape as the monsters tumble into the sea. Tsukioka and Kobayashi go to Osaka to help Dr. Yamane and the authorities investigate the encounter. The new monster is identified as an Ankylosaurus and is named Anguirus. Dr. Yamane shows the authorities footage of the first Godzilla attack and notes that it was killed by the oxygen destroyer, but its inventor died and that there were no proven countermeasures left against Godzilla. Dr. Yamane suggests issuing a blackout and using drop flares to lure Godzilla away due to the first Godzilla being sensitive to light. Tsukioka's girlfriend, Hidemi, expresses her concern for Osaka to him, and he reveals that he thought about her when he thought he might die on Iwado Island. They watch as the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, JSDF, take off to find Godzilla, but scientists note that it may prove difficult due to the possibility of Godzilla hiding in caves within the seabed. Later, Godzilla is spotted heading for the key channel between Shikoku and Wakayama Prefecture. Yamaji, Tsukioka's boss and Hidemi's father, notes that if Godzilla wreaks havoc in those waters, their fishing company will lose valuable fishing ground and strike a blow at production. Later, an alert is issued for the Osaka region as Godzilla changes course for Osaka Bay. The JSDF cut off the lights in the city and lure Godzilla with flares. Tsukioka leaves Hidemi at her home for safety and leaves with Kobayashi to meet Yamaji at his cannery. Convicts escape from their transport and lead police on a chase that ends with a few convicts crashing into an oil refinery, triggering an explosion, while other convicts escape into Osaka. The explosion lures Godzilla back to Osaka, forcing the JSDF to attack. Attracted by the flares, Anguirus emerges and engages Godzilla. The monsters battle throughout the city, destroying Yamaji's cannery and killing the convicts in the process. Godzilla kills Anguirus and returns to the sea after burning the body with its atomic breath. In the aftermath, Yamaji moves operations to Hokkaido to make full use of the fisheries and cannery, and also sends Kobayashi to guide trawlers. During a company dinner, Tsukioka reunites with Tajima, a friend from college and the war. Kobayashi hints to Hidemi that he's fallen in love with a certain woman. The dinner is interrupted by news that a ship was sunk by Godzilla. The following morning, Tsukioka helps the JSDF search for Godzilla and tracks its location on Kamiko Island. Kobayashi departs to aid Tsukioka but leaves his notebook behind. Hidemi peeks at the notebook and discovers a picture of her inside. Kobayashi attempts to stop Godzilla from escaping, but it's struck by Godzilla's atomic breath and crashes into the mountaintop, killing him. The crash creates a small avalanche that engulfs Godzilla, inspiring the JSDF to bury it with a bigger avalanche but lack firepower. The JSDF return to base to reload missiles, and Tajima reluctantly accepts Tsukioka's request to take him. The JSDF creates a wall of fire to block Godzilla's escape, while the JSDF triggers avalanches by blasting the mountaintops. Godzilla exhales one last atomic breath before being completely buried by the last avalanche triggered by Tsukioka. Relieved, Tsukioka lets Kobayashi's spirit know that they have finally defeated Godzilla. All right, how about we get into some fun facts on Godzilla Raids Again, or some behind-the-scenes facts?
Sure thing.
Godzilla Raids Again was the first Godzilla film to feature multiple monsters, which we had spoken on earlier. The Godzilla suit used for this film, otherwise titled the Gyakushi or the Gyakushi Goji, was slimmer and lighter than the previous Shodai or Shadai Goji. It just depends on how you...
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Shodai.
Shodai?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I've heard a couple different pronunciations in like videos and whatnot, so I didn't know which one was technically correct.
I don't pretend to be an expert. I just say my version with confidence. Keep it rolling.
So that was the Shodai Goji suit. That suit was used in the first film, and the film in this one was lighter and slimmer, putting less pressure on actor Hiro Nakajima and making the fight scenes with Anguirus much easier.
Yeah, this one always sort of feels like a weird sort of 1950s version of the Godzilla Final War suit that we see way later. So I kind of, it's not a great Godzilla design. It's not a terribly handsome design, but I kind of dig it for its own weird reasons.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a completely different Godzilla. So, not all, animals look the same, dogs or humans or any other creature, not all look the same. So it's no reason this one doesn't looks different than the first one.
Yeah, this one born with a learning disorder.
The JSDF's tactic of enforcing blackout in Osaka to protect it from Godzilla is the same tactic used by Japan at the end of World War II to protect cities from Allied bombing raids.
Oof, that's a little dark, but that's interesting.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a fun fact for me though, because I feel like I never would have known that if.
Yeah, an interesting parallel with reality for sure.
Yeah, you would never connect that. You would just think, oh, these guys are smart. Turn the power to the city off, and you think the monster will go away. Godzilla Raids Again is the only Godzilla film to date where Godzilla's dorsal fins consistently do not glow prior to him releasing his atomic breath, and later films would only occasionally not show the discharge, often by mistake.
That's very interesting. Yeah, they even animated the fins and dorsal plates in the original 54, and it kind of shows, that's a hand drawn animated kind of effect, and that's probably a time crunch kind of a thing. They didn't really have the time to animate the blast, so there you go. And my memory's a little rusty at this point, but I also think a lot of the blasts that Godzilla does, they very much use the sort of practical effects, sort of blowtorch from the mouth. I'm not remembering a ton of the animated blasts in this movie, and that again might be a thing where the film was rushed so quickly that they didn't have as much post production to do the animated effects.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. It could have been a time or a budget thing, considering, like you said before, that this film was rushed out in what was it, like 6 months?
Yeah, I think basically.
Godzilla Raids Again is one of only 2 Toho Godzilla films in which the JSDF defeat the monster at the end with existing technology rather than a fictional super weapon, along with the Return of Godzilla in 1984. So those are the only 2 where they don't come up with some new super weapon or form of technology or Godzilla battling another monster.
Yeah, and I dig the movies. It's a rare breed of movies. I guess now we kind of have another entry on that list if you consider the most new Godzilla movie, in some ways. So it's very interesting.
There are no scenes in this film which feature Godzilla using his atomic breath from the full suit view. Every time he does, it's a hand-operated puppet, and this is due to the fact that the suit's mouth could not open wide enough for the effect to be performed correctly.
There you go. And that puppet is the one with the sort of blowtorch the fire extinguisher type effect out of the mouth. They never do a close up with the animated breath. It's always that practical breath.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. That was my first thought of it. Is like the usage of fire extinguisher. That's kind of what I always went back to with like this one, and the original 54 is like atomic breath. That's what it kind of reminded me of, like a mist or like a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Gigantus the Fire Monster was distributed in the United States by Warner Bros., who would go on later to distribute the films of the legendary Monsterverse, beginning 55 years later in development, which is absolutely crazy to think that Warner Bros., they made one of the original Godzilla edits, and then here they are 55 years later booming with an entirely new Godzilla universe.
Yeah, it's a wild full circle kind of moment. It's very interesting. I always love things like that.
Absolutely. Love seeing things come full circle and then seeing where they go in the end.
Hmm.
After the film's release, Toho took a 7-year hiatus from making Godzilla films. But however, during these 7 years, they continued to make different kaiju films and introduced two of the other most recognizable monsters from the Showa era, which were Rodan and the original Mothra film.
Yeah, and that Mothra film was very much, in terms of this kind of the style and the way it was made, that Mothra film kind of defined the approach of the movies of the 60s in terms of the difference between the way Godzilla movies in the 60s were a bit more lighthearted and structured a little differently versus the 50s that were kind of more like these serious disaster movies. And so Mothra really did lay a blueprint that a lot of the 60s movies followed pretty strongly. So Mothra's a pivotal movie.
Yeah, I like the original Mothra film. I've only seen that a handful of times as well, and eventually, hopefully, we will be able to get to that one and the Mothra trilogy from the '90s as well.
Yeah, the original Mothra is definitely underrated, underappreciated, and I like I dig the first of the '90s trilogy. I'm not a huge overall fan of the '90s Mothra trilogy, but the first one I always got a kick out of.
Oh yeah, they're fun in their own right, just like all these Godzilla films. You know, there's fun here, and you know,
Definitely.
like me and you have always said, somebody's least favorite is always going to be somebody else's favorite. So
Definitely.
this is a fun one. In the Kaiju guide for the PlayStation 3 and 4 Godzilla video game, Anguirus' bio states that he once battled a monster called or named Gigantus, who has since been banished from the plane of existence, which was an inside joke referencing the American version of Godzilla Raids Again.
That's a lot of fun. I always thought it would have been a fun like inside joke for a Godzilla movie where they maybe have some kind of there's always a point in a debuting Godzilla movie where they have to decide how it's called Godzilla or why it's called Godzilla. And I always thought it would be fun if there was a sort of like 5 second debate where someone's like, "How about Gigantus?" and they're like, "No, that sounds stupid." That would just be a fun moment.
Just another knock at us, dumb Americans
Yeah.
changing stuff that we shouldn't.
Yeah, I kind of like when I was a kid, the way I tried to make sense of it in my head was like, well, after he showed up in Godzilla, maybe all of the scientists of the world kind of got together and determined that a more accurate or more appropriate name for the creature would be Gigantus, and then maybe after a few years they thought that was stupid, so they went back to calling him Godzilla.
Whatever they decided, Godzilla. I am not a fan of the name Gigantus.
That's a
I
cheapo depot
am.
name. That's a generic name as you can come up with.
Yeah, it's I don't know if the monster is gigantic, so let's call it Gigantus. I don't.
Yeah, that it
That's the only
literally
reasoning I could think of for that.
it literally sounds like the cheap American name of a giant monster. Like let's call it like Monsterosity or something. Like I don't know.
Yeah, sounds like exactly what you said is a cheap knockoff. Let's stick with the original Japanese version. I'm gonna call him Godzilla as long as he's around.
Agreed.
My last one for you is Godzilla Raids Again was the first of 4 Godzilla films to have been scored by Masaru Sato. And I am not a huge fan of his work in this film. There's some that caught my attention in listening to the soundtrack, but he does continue to get better. I will say that.
This one isn't that remarkable, but he definitely does have some great tracks in some of his future films that he composes for. So doesn't start off so amazing here, but he delivers some really good stuff down the road, and so I'm looking forward to those.
Yeah, absolutely. We will get into those in the coming episodes. But that is all I have for fun facts for you. I'll transition quick over to give you some quick numbers before we jump into favorite character and other favorites from the film.
Sure.
Godzilla Raids Again had a budget in 1955 of 800,000 American or US dollars. It opened in Japan in 1955 and sold over 8.3 million tickets. It is rated a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb, a 64% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 2.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and 88% of Google users liked this film, which, that's just Godzilla fans again clicking away here, just giving a thumbs up.
Exactly.
Godzilla's on screen for 9 minutes and 32 seconds of this film, or roughly about 12%. And his first appearance is at roughly 8.5 minutes in, or around 10% into the film, when he is caught fighting with the Ankylosaurus, or what is known as Anguirus.
Yeah, the section where one of the websites notoriously says it was a tease, that his debut was a tease, even though it's a full body shot of him and Anguirus fighting.
Yeah, it's a 2-minute fight, but it was only a teaser.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, those are all the numbers I got for you. I got a quick rundown of them. I will ask you who your favorite character was in Godzilla Raids Again.
Yeah, might not be the most dramatic or exciting choice, but I went with the main character of Tsukioka. He's a little vanilla. He's a little bit of a traditional protagonist. Doesn't have an insane amount of personal struggle and drama going on, but this actor goes on to play professor type roles in several future Godzilla movies of the 60s, so it's interesting to see the familiar face when he's younger. But yeah, I mean, I just went with the main guy.
Okay, that's not a bad choice at all. I went with his counterpart, or
Yeah,
his best friend in
that's
Kobayashi.
that's the only other that it's one of those two, and they're a good duo. They've got the great sort of hero and sidekick duo. Nothing wrong with Kobayashi.
They are. I like him. I like your choice as well. And I just like when you get those, they're good buddies, they're good friends. You can tell they get along. You can tell they've been friends for a long time. And it's almost like they're work partners as well. They work together, and they're really the only two characters that you get like any insight into in this film. Yamane comes back, and he's a great character, but he's only in the film for so much.
For one scene, essentially.
Yeah, it truly focuses on Kobayashi and Tsukioka, and those are.
I will say that the American version of the movie that I saw first kind of soured me on Kobayashi, because he's dubbed by a guy who almost sounds like he's like the Yogi Bear voice or something like that. It's this really goofy voice, and so like the character is almost kind of insufferable in the English dub. So it's amazing when you watch the Japanese cut with subtitles and he's back to sounding like a normal human. So it makes the character far less annoying, but it kind of just sticks with me. It's hard to like the character when you've heard him as like this goofball voice for so many years.
Yeah, there's a couple dubbed voices in this entire Godzilla franchise that you hear them, and it's just like, that's the voice you picked for that character. I'm kind of curious to see who was the one making these decisions.
Yeah, it's kind of iconic, but in a bad way.
Right. Oh, you went first for characters, so I'll go ahead and give you my favorite score, since I was the one that commented on it a little earlier. And my favorite soundtrack or piece of music from this film is it's the main title. There's not a whole lot to choose from in this film, as I said earlier. Down the road, I mean, there's films that, I mean, you like the whole soundtrack, or the whole, there's 5 out of the 10 or 12 or 15 tracks that you can't decide between. But this one, for me, it was the main title for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's also the pick I went with, and essentially the main title, the sort of main musical piece of the main title. You feels like you hear it a lot throughout the film, kind of repeated in other tracks. So it's kind of, I don't want to say like, oh, that's the only music in the movie, but darn near. This isn't a very like musically driven movie, or at least in my memory of it, it doesn't feel that way, or at least not with like memorable pieces of music. So yeah, the main title kind of wins by crushing default. So
Yeah, and that here I'll go ahead and play a little bit so we can appreciate what little Godzilla Raids Again has to offer. I'm not hating on you, Masaru Sato, but
yeah, God bless him.
this one's a little.
Yeah, and he delivers some great tracks in some future Godzilla movies that we will talk about, that I'll sing the praises of, but just not quite there yet with this one.
Yeah, not that main title. That sounds like this. It is not a bad track at all. It's a little more upbeat. It's very lighthearted, and it does the complete opposite of what the 54 Godzilla intro did, where there you hear the footsteps and the roar, and you get into the classic theme, and you have no idea what you're getting in for, if it's going to be dark or what. And then you hear this one, and you kind of get the sense that it's going to be a little bit more lighthearted of a film just by that opening couple minutes.
Yeah, and we talked about how this movie misses the director Ishiro Honda from the first one, and it really misses the composer as well. Just think, if you change nothing about this movie, but you just drop a couple of those iconic Ifukube tracks from the first movie into the right scenes in this movie, just how much more of an energy and an appeal and power that the scenes would have simply with the Ifukube tracks dropped behind them. Sato himself, I believe, is quoted as describing his work on this film, listening to it as like listening to a child learn how to walk. He himself was aware of how he developed as a composer over the years, and his earlier work, in his own opinion, was a little underdeveloped and undercooked. So, he recognized his own growth, and we as fans definitely appreciate the growth he shows in this franchise alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying I could do better, or I could jump in the spotlight and just create a banger of a soundtrack or a main theme. So, I mean, I feel like he started small in this one. Like, he didn't really take any chances or pull any punches. He kind of just went with something that was nice and easy to kind of ease in. And then later on down the road, he kind of turned up the heat a little bit, or, turned up the volume, and he actually expanded himself and went for it.
Yeah, and I mean, when you go 6 months from the first movie being released to them deciding, hey, this is a hit, hey, we need to make another one, write it, film it, edit it, finish it, release it in the span of 6 months, like, that's a pretty insane turnaround. So nobody on this film had, ample amount of time to really, deliver their sort of 100% greatest work, in my opinion.
And it's still a film I enjoy and have fun with. So, I mean,
I don't know too many other
6 months.
Yeah, I don't know too many other 1950s movies that I'd be jumping to watch over this one.
I got a couple that I might. No.
I mean, I'd bring up like War of the Worlds and the original Godzilla, and maybe like a Creature from the Black Lagoon. But as far as I go, like, I'm not a huge connoisseur of all 50s cinema.
Yeah, you spoke on the exact one that I was thinking of, and that is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. That is a trilogy that is one of my all-time favorites. I love those films.
Nice. Okay. See, I'm quite a big fan of the first one. Not so much. not as well aware of or as huge of a fan of the sequels.
Well, maybe we'll have to get Chris to watching them and talking about them on the podcast here later on down the road.
Yeah, maybe. Then we'll watch the perverted remake of The Shape of Water.
I have not seen that, and I for sure truly want to.
It's a very good, very well made movie. It's kind of a joke that it's sort of a perverted remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon, but it kind of is, which only kind of makes it more fun. Guillermo del Toro hits it out of the park with that one. It's a really well made movie.
Yeah, that was as soon as I seen the trailer before they spoke on the name of it, or you see the name in the trailer or the commercials, I honestly thought it was a remake or like a rough retread of Creature from the Black Lagoon until I seen it was not, and I was very sad.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where if it had been, people would have said, well, this is so different and such a reinterpretation. Why didn't he just make an original movie that was sort of in honor of Creature from the Black Lagoon? And that's kind of what he did, which I'm much more of a fan of. Like, if you're going to transform something so hugely, just kind of make it changed enough to make it be your own thing, and then have your own thing that's inspired by the original instead of kind of changing everything about the original.
Yeah, I'll have to put that up a couple notches on my watch list, because I have been wanting to watch that since it came out, and I'm clearly behind the ball.
Yeah, it's legit. It's a good movie.
Well, I'll have to give it a watch here soon. Come on, Connor, get on it. All right, how about we move on to our favorite quote of this film? I'll go first, and I had two for this film that I was kind of battling back and forth between, and one was Dr. Yamane saying, "As for measures to take against Godzilla, I'm afraid right now there are none." And I like that quote because he's pretty much just explaining to everybody in very blatant detail, like, we got nothing. Like, we threw everything we had at this monster the first time it came around. And now that there's another one, we don't have the oxygen destroyer. We don't have anything to kind of match the power that he has.
Yeah.
It
sets the tone perfectly. The line that I went with was another one from Dr. Yamane. I think it's part of that same scene or sequence where he says, "Even with all of our weapons and collective ingenuity, we weren't able to stop Godzilla's frenzied radioactivity-fueled rampage." Which is another just kind of, it feels more like the kind of line you would get from the first movie. It feels like a sort of a tether back to that, and kind of just sets the stage and the dynamics for what they're dealing with in this one.
Yeah, and he seems to have very good quotes in both of these first two films. Kind
of a shame that Yamane didn't have a bigger role in the second movie and wasn't carried on throughout the films.
Yeah, I mean, you could have made him kind of like a third musketeer. He could have been like a trio with the other two. But I mean, I definitely like his character. But the other quote I was stuck on, just because it's a little more heartfelt, was Tsukioka, when he expressed to Kobayashi. He said, "Kobayashi, we defeated Godzilla at last." And you feel that because in the final battle with Godzilla, his best friend or his teammate, his partner, he died trying to overpower and finally defeat Godzilla in the end.
Yeah, it's a good one for sure.
All right, Chris. What about your favorite scene for Godzilla Raids Again? What are you thinking for that?
Oh, it's an easy one for me. It's the final battle between Godzilla and Gearus, where he rips his throat out and sets his corpse on fire, just because it's so important to the history of the franchise for Godzilla to fight another monster and defeat it and be proven as the as the original American title suggests for the first movie, the King of the Monsters. So, for me, that's just it's not necessarily the best Godzilla fighting another monster scene in the franchise, but it's the first, and it's very cool for that. And seeing him sort of like rip Anguirus's throat and the blood and stuff, even in black and white, like it's a great moment. And then he sets his corpse on fire, which is kind of metal, So I really dig that.
Yeah, that was absolutely devastating for Anguirus.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I believe you've said before that it's like Godzilla was committing hate crimes in this movie.
yeah, that was absolutely the original kaiju monster hate crime. He to kill the guy and then you set his body on fire and leave him to burn after he's already dead. I mean, you had an absolute problem with him being in your territory or your neighborhood.
Yeah, and Anguirus was, and Anguirus has been Godzilla's beta male buddy sidekick ever since.
I mean, it's like being, a high schooler. You and another guy get into a stupid fight and beat each other up over something, and 3 days later, you're like, "Hey, dude, you want to come play some basketball? You want to come play some Xbox or something?" For some reason, it's how guys were when we were growing up, and
Yeah.
it just shows that Godzilla and Anguirus are no different.
Yep. He, people often make jokes and speculation about was this the parent of the later Anguirus? Was it like a sibling or something like that? And it's like, man, that kind of almost makes it a little darker if like Godzilla like, kills your other older brother and then you become Godzilla's sidekick. It's just like it makes it weirdly kind of dark.
Yeah, I don't want any problems, but you seem to take care of business, so I'm on your side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Godzilla takes out Anguirus and he has that gladiator moment where he's like, or Troy, where he's like, is there no one else?
I don't know if you have seen I don't know if you watch YouTube a lot or pay attention to like any Watch Mojo.
So I do. I've seen my fair share.
They have a top 10 like brutal Godzilla moments or something.
Hmm.
I'm not exactly sure of the name of the video, but it has the killing of Anguirus. I believe it's in the top 5 out of the 10 for like the most brutal or like vicious acts that Godzilla's committed.
Yeah, and it kind of has a double whammy kind of effect because a lot of kids growing up only know Anguirus as Godzilla's kind of sidekick. So if you then go discover Godzilla Raids Again and he's fighting Anguirus and just like viciously murders him, it's kind of even more shocking,
Yeah, I did not, I grew up on like the later Showa films, such like
Agreed.
Godzilla vs. Gigan, where him and Anguirus are teaming up, and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which we'll get to these films a little later, but you see that and you're like, oh cool, he's got like a little buddy sidekick, and then you go like again, you said go back to this film, and I had seen those before this one, so I was just like, oh my god, like he's absolutely demolishing this guy, and like how did they become friends later on? What's going on?
Exactly.
I, for my favorite scene, chose Godzilla being buried by the avalanche and the JSDF with just how chaotic and like the constant action with the bombs and Godzilla roaring and trying to take out the jets and everything like that. And I like how it continues into the next film with him being buried in the ice or the iceberg and him breaking out. I like the continuity with that. I know you're a big continuity guy, so you appreciate that as well. But it's a chaotic scene that's constant action. It's loud. I get to that part and I crank up the surround sound or the speakers a little extra, and I let it play and I enjoy it and have a good time at that ending.
Yeah, it's a big bombastic finale, and yeah, it is interesting to note that technically, in a lot of ways, there's sort of two main Godzillas in the Showa series, and the original is only in the original film, and then this is the Godzilla that, in theory, carries us from this film all the way through to the end of the Showa series. So this is our main main guy Godzilla here. And yeah, I always dig when movies kind of leave the monster in the bad guy or whoever. I always liked it when Jason gets buried at the end of one movie, and then when he gets resurrected, he's coming out of the grave again. Like I like things like that, the through line of how they finish the monster in one movie and then bring him back in the next movie. And I especially dig this finale because it's very much if there's any fans of Top Gun Maverick listening, it's almost the exact same sort of plot where they have to swoop low into this canyon and drop their bombs and then pull up rapidly to clear the top of the cliff and not crash into the cliff on the ascent back into the sky. So it's like it's this great little thing where it's like, oh man, it's almost straight out of Top Gun Maverick. I love it.
Well, and then another thing I didn't mention is the sacrifice of Kobayashi. He dives in to try to defeat Godzilla once and for all and help out his, I guess you could say, his comrades. And that's another reason I liked him as a character, that he's willing to sacrifice himself to kind of make ends meet and try to do what's best for his friends, comrades, and everyone involved.
Yeah, it doesn't hit quite as hard as Serizawa's sacrifice, but it's still a good moment, and it's interesting because it's much more. It's almost literally a kamikaze strike in some ways. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see that sort of thing portrayed heroically.
If anyone's seen the newer Godzilla -1, you'll see they kind of gave this a little callback with the kamikaze pilots and whatnot, and the thinking, the self-sacrifice and whatnot. I won't get too much into that film and spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it, because eventually we'll do an episode on that as well. But there's constant callbacks. Every newer Godzilla film calls back to something that they've done in one of these first 36, 37, 30, some odd films. And I like that. As soon as I seen it in theaters, I was like, look what they're doing. They did that before.
Yeah, and it's almost one of those things where there's now so many films across so many decades that even unintentionally, to just make a Godzilla movie with all of the typical things you would do with a Godzilla movie, or all the ideas that would pop up, it's almost intentional or not, you're going to be retracing some of the steps that other films have taken in other iterations. People point out, in the Godzilla Kong trailer, there's hints at this sort of subterranean culture within the Hollow Earth, and that's not the first time a Godzilla film has done something like that. Godzilla versus Megalon had a subterranean society and culture. So, I think even when they're not really trying, they're inevitably going to call back and link back to the legacy of the franchise, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. You love to see the callbacks. You like to see, our current directors, paying homage or paying respects to those in our past. And it's all in all a good time. And this Godzilla Raids Again, it's not the original, but it's a fun film. And that's the reason that was my favorite scene. I know we got a little off topic, but this is a fun film. Not quite what the original is, but still something to give a watch and have a good time with.
Definitely.
How did you feel about Anguirus's debut? I mean, we see him down the road a couple times, but let's get into some monster design and let me know how you felt about his original appearance in this one.
Yeah, in short, I dig it a lot. I mean, it's a cool animalistic. Both Anguirus and Godzilla in this one have this kind of this feral aspect to them, this sort of wild animal. When they're clashing, they sort of unintentionally inverted what they were doing with the cameras, which instead of filming it in the usual way you see in these movies where it looks kind of slowed down to make the creatures look bigger, they accidentally sort of tweaked the the camera speed in the other direction, so it makes the movements fast and sort of herky jerky, and it's a little weird and odd, but they liked the effect, so they ended up going with it for this film, just rolling with it. And so it just gives it this sort of, like when you see maybe two wild cats kind of circle each other and then go in and moving very, very, very fastly and crazily, and then they kind of back out and they circle slowly again, and then they're moving very fastly when they attack. It kind of has those kind of vibes to it, and it just feels kind of animalistic, and I dig that.
Yeah, that's the exact word I was going to use. You stole it right away from me, is animalistic. It when I first saw it, it made me think of like a mongoose and a cobra, like how they're just going at each other, and everything, as you said, is just quick. It's a very fast fight, and this is the only Godzilla film that I know of or have seen, and I've seen all but 3 up to this date, which is the anime trilogy, which I'm going to get on here very shortly. But it's the only one I know that.
Yeah, one day we will force you to watch them.
Yes, hopefully. My lady has seen all the Godzillas as well, and she told me very respectfully, she's when it comes to the anime trilogy, I will not be attending.
That's good. That's good. Hey, some of the fans don't really think of them as real Godzilla movies either.
Oh no. Well, she said since she's seen them all, she's so far invested with me that she'll go see newer ones in theaters and whatnot, but the anime trilogy is where she draws the line.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think even diehard anime fans aren't the hugest fans of those movies.
I'm dreading it, but I got to do it no matter what. But to get back on track, this is the only Godzilla movie I know where the action and a fight scene is that fast. And like you said, it makes it look a little more animalistic. It makes it cheesy, but it's something different, that we get in any of the other films, and it's fast, it's quick, it looks mean. Yeah. But I dig it. I dig the way that it's sped up in the way that it is.
And according to trivia, apparently Tsuburaya was so fond of that look that apparently for a number of films after this one, he always had at least one camera shooting at that speed. But like you said, I can't really think of a lot of moments that come up where we see the monster action playing out that fast. I mean, maybe you could take, I'm thinking of like King Kong versus Godzilla and Mothra versus Godzilla and Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Maybe there are some few shots or scenes in those where things are moving kind of fast that maybe it's from that particular camera setup, but it feels rarely used, if at all.
Maybe maybe we'll have to
and again, you'd have to literally,
in the future.
Yeah, you'd have to literally be looking at the footage to try and spot it. But it's like, it's nothing like jumps to mind to the extent that it was used in this movie.
Maybe like quick clips of like Megaguirus like coming in and out attacking Godzilla in that film or something.
Who knows? Yeah.
But I asked you about Anguirus' design. I like it as well. I'm very fond of his design later on in the Showa era, but for a original design that, you're trying to come up with a different type of monster for Godzilla to fight, in his second film, that I am not against this design at all. It's original and it's different. I like that they brought something such, they tried to make it like an ancestor of the Ankylosaurus. I like that they took that route to connect it to reality. So I do like the Anguirus in this film, and I always like when they can connect something to reality, such as how they do later on in the franchise with like the Godzillasaurus and whatnot. So I do like Anguirus.
Indeed.
How do you feel about Godzilla in this film compared to the 54 film, if I can predict your answer here?
Yeah, overall the 54 is definitely my preference. There's some things to enjoy about this one. I kind of like the leaner look. I kind of like the more agile approach, but it's overall a less aesthetically pleasing design. It's kind of a The face is kind of a little on the ugly side, kind of shaped a little oddly. It's got this kind of overbite look to it. People have said that it kind of like makes them think of like Goofy, the cartoon character Goofy, and so now like when I see him, like I think of him making like the Goofy laugh or Goofy noises and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. And so like, it's kind of like unfortunate, but it's certainly like it's kind of in keeping with like Godzilla looking monstrous. It's kind of like unsettling and scary to an extent. You look at it, it's like, ooh, that's a little off-putting, but it's not a very handsome Godzilla design, not a very charming, aesthetically pleasing Godzilla design, but it gets the job done for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's a supposed to be a different Godzilla than the original film. So I do have a few complaints just about like how the teeth in the suit look, whatnot. They're kind of jutted out at a weird angle. They're not, like how teeth are, supposed to be in your mouth.
Yeah, it gives it that overbite kind of ooh look.
Yeah, that's probably the only really complaint I have about this suit. I don't have a problem with the spines at all, or the eyes look kind of a little goofy here and there, but they also did in the original when they used like the hand puppet and whatnot. I don't mind the slimmer look. The sped up film kind of helps with the slimmer look. Like he's slimmer in this film, so it's only makes sense that he would be a faster moving animal or dinosaur. And so I don't mind Godzilla in this film. It's definitely not a G tier, as Chris would say, but it does the job for this film. It's a more lighthearted film with a more lighthearted Godzilla design, I guess you could say.
Indeed.
Well, how about we get into some final thoughts here and talk about the next film that we're going to be doing on episode 3. So if you don't mind, I'll defer to you to go first on some final thoughts on Godzilla Raids Again.
Yeah. So, it's not a hot take to say that it's a inferior sequel to Godzilla, but I think almost any follow-up to the original 54 film was going to be inferior, and they certainly had the odds stacked against this film in the terms of churning it out so quickly. You imagine how differently the stars might have aligned if the scheduling and everything had lined up where they could have immediately asked like, hey, Ishiro Honda, you're directing the next one. Hey, Akira Fukube, you're composing the next one. Like if you just put those two pieces in place and still had it out 6 months later, how much more interesting it could have been, and how much maybe it would have maybe aligned a little closer in quality to the original. You think about, wow, what if they'd get done, a 2-movie deal and Raymond Burr was edited into King of the Monsters and also edited into this movie in a unique way. How interesting could the American cut of this film have been? There's a lot of fun what ifs, but the film as it stands, still an important piece for the franchise. It sort of introduced the Godzilla that wouldn't be killed and dead at the end of the movie. It introduced a Godzilla that was known for fighting other monsters. Introduced the Godzilla that would kind of stand and persist for the rest of this Showa era series. So, an important piece of the franchise, maybe more important than when you actually watch the film, it actually feels, but it's an important part of the series for sure.
Yeah, I definitely like the continuity that we get between this one, the original, and then the following one, which we are going to talk about next episode. But before I get into my final thoughts, I actually wanted to jump into our ranking of these first two. I know, again, that Chris wants to do a keep 10, get rid of 5 of the 15 original Showa era Godzilla films. So I don't think it's anybody's guess which films we're gonna put where out of these first 2 rankings. I mean, Godzilla Raids Again would be at the bottom with the original 54 film in the number one spot as of now, and I believe you would agree.
Indeed, a 2-film ranking, no big spoilers or hot takes there. I think 99.9% of all fans and audiences would prefer the 54 to this 55 sequel.
Yeah, and as of now, I'm sure we're both going to be keeping both films on. I'm not going to get rid of any probably until we get to our 11th film in the era. But
absolutely, yeah. Until we get to the point where we actually have to decide to keep 10 and get rid of the rest, we're going to see where our opinions lie.
Yep. See, may the odds ever be in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll go into some final thoughts. I like Godzilla Raids Again. It is not one of my favorites by any means, but I have fun with it. It's a Godzilla film. I'm a huge Godzilla fan, clearly is why, again, we're talking about these films on a podcast. But it's just it's a lighthearted film. It's fun. It's quick and, it goes by with a breeze. It's 80 minutes long. It's done before you know it. There's good monster action in it. There's not very many good characters, but the main two that you get, it's a nice story to follow, and it's a nice lighthearted follow up to how dark and almost depressing the original 54 Godzilla was.
Yeah, indeed, it's a solid stepping stone film. This film does a lot of things where it kind of walks so that the future Showa era can run a little bit. Not as good as the original, but a solid entry for the series that I think is a little underrated and a little overlooked.
Yeah, I don't hear very many Godzilla fans talk about this. I believe they were playing this at G-Fest last year, and I ended up having tickets to G-Fest and not going, sadly. I would have loved to have seen this on the big screen.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. I mean, heck, I think the oldest Toho Godzilla movie that I saw in theaters is actually Godzilla 2000. I haven't got a chance to see any of the vintage films in a theater setting, so it would be fascinating.
At G-Fest in 2022, I got to see Godzilla vs. Hedra and Godzilla vs. Megalon. So that's as far back as I've been so far.
That sounds like a good time.
Oh, it was a cheese fest. It was absolutely great. My lady was there with me, and the whole crowd, every time Godzilla showed up, we just went into a roar. So it was full on Geek Squad and nerdum.
That's great. That's great.
All right, Chris. Before we get out of here, next week we are looking at a huge film in two separate franchises, which is King Kong vs. Godzilla, and that was released on August 11th, 1962. And we will be looking at that again next episode next week. So I do want to thank you for joining me, again, 2 episodes in and very many to go. So I hope you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge one, and I think it's a huge film for just the global historical popularity of the of the kaiju giant monster genre as a whole. So, very, very important film.
Yeah, it's got the tagline, I believe on the DVD box I had, it was like the mightiest monster mash or monster brawl of them all. So, you're getting into something big if it's got a tagline such as that.
Exactly.
Well, again, I appreciate you joining me. It's always fun to sit here and nerd out over these films, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. Well, again, next week we got King Kong versus Godzilla, but until next time.